It's kind of a crazy time to be a One Piece fan. Firstly, we're in the middle of Elbaf, which was an arc that has been hyped up since damn near chapter 100 of One Piece, which was literally 25 or 26 years ago. Raise your hand if you're not even that old as a human. Oh yeah, we're also in a flashback, which could be defined as a Rox D Xebec flashback, and we have the potential to literally interact with Emu. One Piece is going incredibly hard. It's also kind of crazy to think that we've probably already met all the top tier characters who have a role to play in the current events. I can't really see Oda dropping anybody else. But of course, we all know by now that this story isn't just about the characters that are currently alive, or the people who have influenced characters that are currently alive. This is a culmination of an adventure which started thousands of years ago. But yeah, if one of your favorite things about One Piece is the introduction of new hype characters, all hope is not lost. There was some guy named Davy Jones in the past. Was Davy Jones Joy Boy or somebody else? That's what I want to discuss today. I want to create what I hope is a very compelling fictional narrative based on evidence for the story of Davy Jones. This theory is going to be absolute insanity at the end, so strap yourselves in, apply your tinfoil, let's begin. Hey YouTube, Joyboy here. So, I think that it's fairly apparent to most people that the actual amount of canon information that we have about Davy Jones, even things that you could extrapolate or surmise, right, is extremely limited. I'll of course do my best to make the biggest mountains out of the tiniest shreds of information, but there's just no way that you can form like a complete story based on what we have. So really, the only reason it's even possible to make this video is Davy Jones is an actual pirate legend. I'm pretty certain that a Venn diagram of people who have seen Pirates of the Caribbean and people who watch One Piece is very nearly a circle. Davy Jones is kind of a big deal. And I think that it's fair to assume, although there will be obvious differences, a lot of Davy Jones in One Piece story is going to be based off of lore. Probably in exactly the same way that you can read about Loki, the character of One Piece, and draw a comparison to Loki from Norse mythology. On a surface level, they're very different, but on a very fundamental level, they're essentially the same. Anyway, this might be a little bit long-winded, but this is how I want your mindset to be. This is how I want you to think about Davy Jones. This is just how Oda does it. The better that you understand the lore that the character is inspired from, the better you'll understand the character. So I feel like we have to begin with the story of Davy Jones, and this is actually a lot more simple than you would think that it would be, because unlike many characters from various mythologies that Oda has tackled over the course of One Piece, Davy Jones doesn't really have a story. From history, Davy Jones is really just a name. When you're talking about Davy Jones, you're almost always talking about Davy Jones's locker. And Davy Jones' locker is a euphemism for death at sea. Davy Jones is presented as kind of the ruler of the pirate underworld. In a lot of depictions, he's something like the devil of the sea. So I guess we really don't know too much about Davy Jones. And I guess the theory ends here, yeah? Well, maybe not. There are two additional things that we could potentially use. Firstly, the lore and mythology of Davy Jones has intrigued people for a really long time. Naturally, there's scholarly pursuits about what the origin might be. Even if we don't precisely know, there are theories, which I think are relevant to discuss. And secondly, sometimes the truth of an inspiration in One Piece is not what is most relevant. That's the thing about myths and legends, right? Is that maybe there was some actual event that inspired it, but after that it became a story, and a story can be told in different ways. Creative liberties are in fact a thing. So the character Davy Jones in One Piece could end up having a lot in common with the fictional representation of Davy Jones from pop culture, i.e. Pirates of the Caribbean. Again, this is something that we have talked about at certain times, like, again, a character like Loki, right? Marvel is just as relevant as the prose Edda. Oda is not a lore purist. Like, I don't want to break your hearts, right? But Davy Jones was not a squid, and he didn't sail on the Flying Dutchman. The Flying Dutchman, in fact, was a whole other different pirate lore. Disney smashed it together, and like hell, guys, it worked. Legend and mythology do be like that. So here's a brief summary of the lore of Davy Jones as per Disney. Originally, Davy Jones was just a man, a pirate, and a sailor. The circumstances are a bit vague, but he eventually falls in love with the beautiful and capricious sea god named Calypso. As proof of his love, he agreed to carry out a task from the goddess, guiding the souls that perished at sea towards their rest. The idea being that Davy Jones could only return to Calypso's island once every 10 years. But as it turns out, he was tricked and betrayed. He returned to this island where he expected to find Calypso, and she wasn't there. It's interesting to me how people think about Davy Jones as the devil of the sea, but in Pirates of the Caribbean, it's really Calypso. Calypso, he makes a deal with Calypso, who is basically the devil. He doesn't actually get what he wants and is instead condemned to a pretty horrible fate, doing something for an eternity that he really does not want to do. So due to this betrayal, the First Brethren Court convened, and Davy Jones plotted with other pirates to tear the rule of the sea away from the sea goddess Calypso. Ultimately, the Brethren imprisoned her body into that of a mortal woman. But he was still conflicted because he loved her so much. Because of the pain that it caused him, he carved out his own heart and locked it away in the dead man's chest. I think for all intents and purposes, you can think of it like Davy Jones removed his own soul, afterwards becoming an evil being. He then forsaked his sacred duty to ferry souls to the afterlife, and instead recruited those who did not wish to die into his crew, which basically amounts to slavery. He really took advantage of people's fear of death, or their fears of what they hadn't accomplished in life, becoming something more akin to a literal devil. But eventually the whole conflict became about Davy Jones's heart. Control his heart and control the man. So here's where I feel like the story gets a depth that I find to be interesting. He was a part of the First Brethren Court, a pirate alliance, you could say, to capture the goddess of the sea, who had proven herself to be a devil. But then Davy Jones became the devil, and the Brethren Court reconvened and decided to release Calypso in order to fight him and the Navy. So there's something cyclical in this that I think is very relevant to One Piece. Essentially, whoever holds the power becomes the devil. First, it's the goddess of the sea, Calypso. Then it's Davy Jones. Then it's the East India Trading Company, aka the Navy. Then it's the pirates. Everyone out here making deals with the devil, ultimately becoming a devil. So the devil sort of changes its face. But at every stage in this adventure, it's the warriors of the sea battling against the devil. As they were all fighting each other, they were all simultaneously fighting for the same thing. Just different interpretations of what the true evil was. But ignoring the details for a second and just viewing this as generally as possible, Davy Jones was a pirate. Davy Jones had a love story. Davy Jones was betrayed. Davy Jones lost his soul, and then he became a devil. The way to free him from his curse was to kill him. Davy Jones needed to die. So look guys, we'll talk more about Pirates of the Caribbean in the future of this video because there are things that I have not mentioned yet. But I think that it is incredibly likely that the story of Davy Jones from One Piece will share similar beats to this. The official lore that we have for Davy Jones from One Piece comes from Robin during the Foxy arc. She tells us that Davy Jones was a pirate from long ago who was cursed by a demon, and that is already close enough for me. But like I said earlier, even though there's no official lore for Davy Jones from history, there are scholarly pursuits as to where this name actually came from. This isn't necessarily the truth, but it's been discussed so much, this is the closest that we can actually get to something based on history. So really what I want to talk about is the theory that the name Davy Jones is actually derived from the story of the prophet Jonah from the Bible. But I just want to go ahead and say this up front, right? Those who follow the channel or those who follow theories, period, already know that Oda has taken a lot of inspiration from the Bible, so this already makes at least some sense. So I don't really feel as though most of the details are relevant. I want to give you kind of a summary understanding of who Jonah was. So Jonah's defining trait is his initial refusal to follow God's command. He essentially fled from God. And there's a few interpretations as to why this is the case, but I think that you can assume that Jonah had fears about fulfilling God's command. But Jonah has a kind of depth to him that I find to be interesting. Eventually, God summons a storm to prevent Jonah from fleeing. And Jonah readily admits to the sailors that he's sailing with that he is the cause of this storm because of his disobedience to God. He even instructs them to throw him overboard to calm the storm so that their lives may be spared, which I think shows a willingness to face consequences, but is less repentance than it is acceptance. He'd rather die than fulfill God's command. So this leads us to what God actually commanded Jonah to do, and that was to preach the gospel in a city that Jonah considered to be evil. Preaching the gospel would be offering these evil people salvation, which I guess Jonah thought that they did not deserve. And later he becomes angry that God spares this evil city. He did not want to save the wicked. So in the middle of a great storm, Jonah was cast overboard. But God did not actually intend for Jonah to die. Instead, God summoned a great fish, which in most popular interpretations is described as a whale. The whale swallows Jonah and he's stuck in there for 3 days and 3 nights to give him time to think and pray over what had happened and why he was wrong. So just some contextual knowledge for you about the culture of piracy and the beliefs of the time. Jonah as a sailor, as a seaman, is associated with bad luck. I'm sure that you could imagine if sailors were at sea and a storm suddenly appeared, they'd be looking around at each other of like, who's the Jonah? Who do we need to throw overboard, right? So Jonah is a name that is recalled while experiencing disaster at sea. And this works well with the linguistic similarity between the name Jonah and the name Jones. It's kind of thought to be a corruption or evolution of that name, while Davy could be a common name thrown at the beginning or in reference to a spirit. But this is just kind of how language works. It evolves, and the actual reasons for this is often not clear. Somebody says one thing, other people think that it's cool, suddenly everyone's saying it, and nobody knows where it came from. But the other concrete part of the Davy Jones legend is Davy Jones' locker, and this roughly aligns with Jonah's experience from the Bible of being swallowed by a great fish or a whale, and confined in its depths. It symbolizes a place of divine punishment or isolation. And it's also true that Davy Jones' locker is never really described as hell. It's not described as the afterlife. It's more of a purgatory, a place between life and death. Remember, from Pirates of the Caribbean, Davy Jones's task was to ferry souls to the afterlife, but first those souls had to arrive in Davy Jones' locker, which is like this intermediate place. This also works exceptionally well with Jonah being inside of a whale, neither alive nor dead. But the purpose of bringing this up to you is I think that this could absolutely be Oda's inspiration for Davy Jones's character, the character of Davy Jones from One Piece, that guy's personality. Also potentially events in his life. The broad strokes of it is that Jonah was filled with hate. He wanted the evil to suffer in hell, and it took a lot for him to grow. But otherwise, he saw himself as a moral and ethical man who wanted to help save the innocent souls of the world. But yeah, the reason that I would say that I feel strongly that Davy Jones from One Piece's character will be inspired by Jonah is after you've gotten the Jonah story, right? There's already a character that we could compare him to. And this person, in my opinion, is Rox D. Xebec. At least for right now, Oda wants to leave us with the impression that Rox was a genuinely good dude. Right now, we know that Rox wants to dethrone the Celestial Dragons and become king of the world. But we don't yet have the entire story of why. However, judging based on what we have already gotten, it is abundantly clear that this involves the world government being evil or being wicked, just like Jonah. When Rox finds King Harold in the Holy Land, his first thought, and his face looks a little bit concerned, he says, "A giant in the Holy Land? Is this guy lost or something?" He knows that the Celestial Dragons take giants for slaves. This appears to bother him. And this may be a bit of a reach, but we know that Loki worships Rox, and when Loki is confronted with the Celestial Dragons, he says straight to their face, like, "I would never join scum like you," which is a pretty incredible statement given that Loki has outright stated his goal is to destroy the world, but yet somehow the Celestial Dragons are even worse. I assume Loki, as a disciple of Rox, is repeating something Rox would have said. But I think that it's fitting to say that Loki worshipped Rox because the narrator text box tells us that Rox D. Xebec worshipped Davy Jones. Davy Jones, who scholars and historians think is based off of Jonah. So Rox wants to save the world, but he also wants the wicked to suffer. Oh yeah, and just like Jonah, Rox refused the command of God, in this case, Emu. And then just like Jonah, Rox fled from God, taking to the sea with a crew that wasn't really his, and that had no loyalty to him. Jonah's crew threw him overboard when faced with the wrath of God. And we already pretty much know that Rox was betrayed by his crew in God Valley. Rox Xebec is almost definitely Jonah, meaning Davy Jones is almost definitely Jonah. So I think now, guys, we have something to work with. I think that the character of Davy Jones will be reminiscent of Jonah, and the story of Davy Jones will be reminiscent of some of the story of Jonah and some of the story of Davy Jones from Pirates of the Caribbean. But there's one last thing that we need to bring up, because we already know that Davy Jones has something to do, is involved in some way with Davy Back fights introduced in the Foxy arc. It is absolutely not a coincidence that Rox D is described by the narrator as a worshipper of Davy Jones, and Rox D acquired his crew via Davy Back fights. But the whole idea of this game is taking crew members from other crews. It's a game of forced subservience, not all that different from the powers that Emu has already demonstrated, which also involves a game. But if you think about Pirates of the Caribbean, Davy Jones did not begin as the devil, and if you think about Jonah, Jonah is not the devil. However, Sanji tells us that pirates refer to taking what you want from your enemies as quote-unquote Davy Back. So let's just cut to the chase. Davy Back fights. Guys, I think that this game, this event, was created in order to get Davy Jones back. Look, guys, I have a very strong suspicion that someone or something took Davy Jones's soul. So whether it was Emu or another person who possessed Emu's powers, I think that this is the very reason that Davy Back fights exist. As a side note, everyone should listen to the song The Devil Went Down to Georgia, because that pretty well describes how I think that Oda is portraying the devil. Davy Jones challenged the devil to a game, a competition, something that would later be called a Davy Back fight because Davy Jones lost. He lost his soul and was forced to join the devil's crew. Like Dory and Brogy, Davy Jones was transformed into a demon, and the only way that the remainder of his crew could get him back was to challenge the devil to another game. Davy Back fights might literally have been training to get better at this game. But I think that it should be obvious that all of this works incredibly well with the story of Davy Jones from Pirates of the Caribbean. Davy Jones removed his own heart, effectively removed his own soul, and placed it in the dead man's chest, which might very well be Davy Jones's locker. Afterwards, the pirate Davy Jones became the devil himself. So look, guys, this is the long and short of it. I think that Davy Jones challenged the devil of the sea in One Piece to a game that he lost. And in Pirates of the Caribbean, Davy Jones challenged the goddess of the sea, Calypso. He technically won, but in reality, he also lost. Because of the guilt and pain of it, he removed his own heart, or removed his own soul, and became a demon. So in One Piece, I find it to be incredibly likely that Davy Jones transformed into a demon and became a pawn of the devil. I really hope that you guys are entertained by all of this, because I think that this is all pretty solid. We have ourselves a story, but obviously not complete. I kind of began this video with a question. We really know of two main characters from the way distant past, those characters being Joy Boy and Davy Jones, and it's fair to wonder if Davy Jones was in fact Joy Boy, and I think that nothing in this really contradicts that notion. If this is where your thoughts kind of settle and end, then by all means, but I'd like to spice it up a little bit. Make sure that I for sure give you something that you have never heard before, you would not hear from anybody else, and at the end of the day, you may not hear again. But damn if there's still some things that we could potentially use. So first things first, the thing that we've already said is that in Pirates of the Caribbean, right, Davy Jones' story was a love story. Davy Jones made a deal with the woman that he loved and was ultimately betrayed by her. But that's not actually the entire story, because Calypso's motivations are actually explained, and it's really hard to classify it as betrayal. Calypso was the goddess of the sea. She told Davy that she still loved him, but that it was her untamable nature which prevented her from waiting for him. Guys, there's something to be said for a comparison between Calypso and of Nika and Luffy from One Piece. She had an untamable nature, something like freedom ruled her. Davy Jones saw it as betrayal and saw her as a devil, but that was not really the case. If you really want to sit down and think about it, there's interesting parallels that you could explore. Calypso was untamable, right? Davy Jones was given a task by Calypso and he also was untamable. And then later on you had the Navy or the East India Trading Company in a battle versus who they perceived to be the devil, piracy itself. The pirates were simultaneously untamable. So in a way, each one of them have declared freedom their enemy. And I think that this is also shared with the story of Jonah. Jonah was given a task by God, which he refused and ran from. It's easy to speculate that Jonah felt betrayed by God because he didn't understand why the wicked must be saved. I hope you guys are following me, but it's possible that Jonah believed the devil and God to be playing a game, and he was suddenly a part of the devil's crew because he couldn't understand why else he would be tasked with saving the souls of the wicked. Then in turn, just like Davy Jones, Jonah betrayed God. So I'd like to believe that this element is present in the story of Davy Jones from One Piece. Davy Jones made enemies with somebody that he loved, or somebody that he was friends with. Davy betrayed a person that was very important to him, someone akin to a god. And he did this because he himself felt betrayed, although he was wrong. So was Davy Jones Joy Boy? Or was Davy Jones somebody in the past who consumed the Nika devil fruit and is essentially a parallel to Luffy? I don't think so. Going down this rabbit hole leads me to believe that Davy Jones was actually a friend of somebody like Luffy. Always be aware of the assumptions that you're making, because they're just assumptions. They don't have to be the case. Guys, Davy Jones does not have to be the captain of some sort of great pirate crew. Davy Jones could have been a crew member. Davy was given a command by God, which he refused and fled from, perhaps because he felt he had been betrayed. Davy Jones could have been given an order from his captain, who possessed the Nika devil fruit and essentially been God. Or if this phrasing bothers you, you can think of it like God's champion, aka God's son, or the sun god. If you believe everything that I've said, then being a pirate literally implies playing a game. You are fighting the devil, and the stakes are your freedom. Once you begin the game, you cannot quit, because even if you escaped with your life, you've lost what is most important, your dreams, which might as well be your soul. Zoro tells us that he would rather die. This also happens to be a part of the lore of the Davy Back fight. There are 3 articles of defeat. Crew members captured during the game can only be reclaimed through said game, and those that are captured must immediately swear their allegiance to their opponent's captain. And 3rd, a stolen flag may never be displayed again. Anyone who does not obey these articles goes to Davy Jones's locker as a disgrace. Going to Davy Jones's locker is a euphemism for losing your soul. You haven't actually died. It's not the afterlife. It's more so a purgatory. Basically, whether it is literal or metaphorical, I believe that Davy Jones did not play by the rules of the game. He quit the crew after it had already begun, and for that he suffered something worse than death. So look guys, I'm just gonna say it, and I'm already telling you, this is going to be the most wild theory for the identity of Davy Jones, but it makes sense, okay? I wonder if the character that Davy Jones could be paralleled with is a character similar to Usopp. Before you knee-jerk too hard, I want to take you back to Water 7. Guys, Usopp is Jonah. Usopp was given a command by his captain, who also happens to be the sun god Nika, the future king of the pirates, another version of the god of the sea. This command was to abandon his friend, the Going Merry, who was fated to die, a command which Usopp did not understand and rejected. So Usopp defied his captain and fled from the crew. Metaphorically, just like Jonah, the Straw Hat crew threw Usopp overboard, because the same as Jonah, that was what Usopp was asking for. Like Jonah and God, he had decided to help make Luffy king, but when asked to do something that he did not want to do, because he was angry and afraid, he chose to break his vow. So the same as Jonah, after this, Usopp faced a trial. He knowingly picked a fight with his captain, or God, and literally intended to make God his adversary. In kind of the same way that Luffy owned the Going Merry, God owns the world. Usopp wanted this ship, so he had to take it from God. I think what Jonah wanted back from God was his freedom. So they fought. God sent a storm. But the same as Jonah, of course, Usopp lost. And afterwards, he was metaphorically inside the belly of the whale. He was alone. When he had tied his fate to the Going Merry, Usopp had chosen death. So like Jonah within the whale, Usopp was in a kind of purgatory where he was neither dead nor alive. And this is hilarious, but also fitting. Usopp ceased to be. Sogeking replaced him. So the same as Jonah, Usopp spent this time thinking about what he wanted and what he had done wrong. Perhaps coming to terms with the fact that fear is what motivated him. Even though deep down he already knew that what God commanded him to do was right. So at the end of the day, eventually Jonah did fulfill God's command. He traveled to the evil city in order to save its people. And in Water 7, Usopp eventually let the Merry go. He couldn't stop the Merry from dying. That was impossible. Like Jonah when he let go of his freedom. He put his faith in God and in fate, even though it hurt and he couldn't understand. Traveling to the evil city of Enies Lobby with God at his side to save God's people, or in this case, person, who many consider to be a demon or a devil, unworthy of being saved. Nico Robin. There are so many layers to this as well because while Nico Robin is a person, she also represents an entire people, the will of Ohara. And of course, as you might expect, because Jonah had betrayed God, eventually he apologized, just like Usopp. Oh yeah, and before I forget, right, a lot of people already know that Usopp's lies become truth. So just like Jonah, Usopp is literally a prophet. For a theory that does not include many, if any, actual details from the story, this is as strong, as solid as it gets. I don't feel like I need to explain in full how Oda uses inspirations. There's a character in the story of One Piece named Davy Jones, and Davy Jones is an actual pirate legend. Historians believe that Davy Jones is based off of the prophet Jonah from the Bible. So far, based on what we've gotten, Rox D's story resembles Jonah, and the narrator literally tells us that Rox Xebec is a worshipper of Davy Jones. But if Rox Xebec's story heavily resembles Jonah, Usopp from Water 7's story is 10,000% Jonah. As I imagine that Usopp's story is more hidden than Rox Xebec, there are potentially more important clues left in Usopp's story to foreshadow a little something about Davy Jones, such as the fact that while Usopp claims to be the captain, he is in fact a crew member. A crew member specifically of the guy who is the sun god Nika in One Piece. And all of this is remarkably fitting because you realize, like Jonah is a crew member, right? His captain was God. Same with Davy Jones from Pirates of the Caribbean, originally at least, right? He was a crew member of the Sea Goddess. And the last thing that I want to throw into all of this is a reminder of the character of Loki, who is a worshiper of Rox Xebec, who is a worshiper of Davy Jones. Initially, at the very least, Loki is portrayed in a very similar way as the devil. He tries to make a deal with Luffy to free him. He claims to have the ability to give Luffy his heart's desire. But the subtext of all of this, just like the devil, is that Loki is an expert liar. Another thing which he has in common with Usopp. And honestly, I would like to apply this trait to Rox Xebec as well. I think that there's still a lot that we have to learn about Rox, but he comes across as not entirely honest. In a very similar way as Loki, it seems like Rox wants to come across as kind of heartless or willing to do whatever. But is this what he actually wants? And is he really being honest with everyone? This is potentially super deep because I feel like it could go either direction. Rox could be a genuinely awesome dude, or he could be much more evil than we think that he is. Either direction, I sense dishonesty, and when you look at his son Blackbeard, it might have been inherited. But anyway, now we have a few more ingredients to cook with, so let's get even more detailed. I believe at the end of the story, we will be able to parallel Davy Jones from One Piece and Usopp from Water 7. So here's what happened. Davy Jones was a crew member of a character that we would compare to Luffy. This could be Joy Boy. This could be somebody else because this story spans 3,000 years. But for the sake of saving words, I'm just going to refer to this character as Luffy, and don't be too confused about that. Davy Jones and Luffy had a disagreement, and Luffy asked of Davy Jones something that he did not think was right. My personal guess is that Luffy was fighting somebody who, at the time, we would compare to the devil. And for some reason, Luffy decided not to fight them. This could end up being something that is paralleled with Oden's story or flashback from Wano. Oden decided not to fight Orochi and Kaido, and there were people of the island that didn't understand and agree with his decision. They called him a coward and a fool, which is something that Usopp implies about Luffy when they fight in Water 7. And really, I find all of this to be fitting because it touches on an even deeper philosophical question. If the devil is evil and God is what is right, why doesn't God defeat the devil? So Davy Jones leaves the crew to fight the devil himself. So look, I understand that I'm missing like one crucial bit of information of why didn't Joy Boy defeat the devil if I'm assuming that to be true. Also assuming that he could actually do that, but I do have a speculation. But the logic is essentially you have characters like Roger, who instead of fighting Emu, fought Rox in God Valley to protect, it seems, celestial dragons. Also similar circumstances with Oden, although Oden did eventually fight Orochi and Kaido, but initially there was a reason not to that many people did not understand. At the same time, dreams are obviously important to the story of One Piece, and Usopp's dream is to become a brave warrior of the sea, which is also paralleled with Jonah, who dreamed of becoming God's messenger. So Usopp could potentially grow to a point where fighting the devil is how he fulfills his dream, how he becomes the person that he wants to be, have the courage to defy the devil. But then, for some reason he doesn't understand, Luffy stands in the way of this dream. So like Davy Jones from Disney and Jonah, Usopp turns against the sun god. He sees this not as fear, but as courage. And as Usopp fights Luffy in Water 7, he tells Luffy this: "Go ahead and try to kill me. I'll beat you at your own game. I've already figured out how to bring you down." Usopp is treating Luffy as if he is the devil. But honestly, a lot of people in the community like theories because they're edgy, or because they're cool, or because they're emotional, but not too many people speculate from the standpoint of a joke. But quite frankly, if an idea is funny, it is infinitely more likely to take place in the story of One Piece, because that's like what One Piece is. So what I'm saying, guys, is that Davy Jones doesn't necessarily have to be the strongest character in the verse. If he's paralleled with Usopp, right, you could think about Davy Jones as a character similar to a guy like Buggy as well. Buggy is also a liar. Buggy ends up recruiting this massive crew because of his reputation as a former member of the Pirate King's crew. So all I'm saying is that Oda keeps stringing along the idea of God Usopp. The idea or eventual fact that Usopp will have 10,000 people in his crew. Basically, it is absolutely hilarious that characters like Rox D, Xebec, or Blackbeard, or Loki are all disciples of Davy Jones, who was the Buggy or the Usopp of his era. So Davy Jones leaves the crew to fight the devil and somehow, someway, recruits a massive crew. But the nature of this crew is very different from Luffy's crew or Joy Boy's crew. Like in the present story, you can see that every member of the Straw Hats are individually motivated. They don't view Luffy as their king or their god. They're all on this adventure together. However, Davy Jones' crew, similar to Usopp and similar to Buggy, view him as God. They worship him because of the partial truths woven within his lies. But yeah, guys, the idea that Davy Jones's crew worshipped him is actually already justified from the story, because Rox D, Xebec is described as a worshipper of Davy Jones. But a character like Buggy is not individually that strong. A character like Usopp is not individually that strong, and I wonder if a character like Davy Jones is not individually that strong. So if you're going to confront the devil, you can't win by just beating them up. So the plan becomes to outsmart or outwit the devil. Davy Jones challenges the devil to a game. But in a moment which could be masterfully ironic, right? The devil defeats Davy Jones, but then kind of gives him what Usopp or Davy Jones always wanted: to become a brave warrior of the sea who does not feel fear. Davy Jones had challenged the devil with an army of 10,000 men. But when it became clear that Davy Jones was a fraud and would lose, his crew betrayed him. Alone, he was afraid. So he inspired the greatest taboo of the Davy Back fight. He ran. And it was either by doing so or thereafter, he broke the rules of the game. And his soul was forfeit to what would later be called Davy Jones' locker. So Davy Jones' soul is taken by the devil, and he is literally transformed into a demon, which is also kind of what he wanted to be all along. He was remade to be strong, incapable of dying. And I also think that he was freed of his fear because he lost the ability to love. And I suppose the messaging here is that the only people who truly feel no fear are people who have nothing to protect. So look guys, sometimes I don't always have the answer, and even if this is close to being true, there's no way that it is 100% accurate. But I just want to remind you that being a demon, whatever the circumstances might be, is contagious. And it's also possible that Davy Jones, aka Buggy, aka Usopp, had the world convinced that they were a god. So as the champion of the devil, they possess the ability to flip their followers into demons. So eventually hearing about this, the character that we are paralleling with Luffy, right? Maybe he eventually meets Davy Jones as a demon. Regardless, he wants to save his friend. But there is only two ways to do this. He must either kill him or get his soul back. Personally, I would imagine that it would be very difficult for Luffy to kill Usopp, as an example. So option B would seem very appealing. The question then would be, how exactly do you get Usopp's soul back? Well, maybe you have to play the game. Thus the creation of Davy Back fights. This is literally a rule of the game. You can only get your crew member back by playing the game. I think that you understand that all of this is simply a metaphor, because your dreams are your soul. What you want makes you who you are. This is about taking our dreams back from the devil. This is something that has been promised. So like Luffy with Sanji in Whole Cake Island, God needs his crew. And in One Piece, he's willing to wait. But look, man, let's imagine for a second that the story that we're talking about happened during the Void Century. Davy Jones was a character during the Void Century, originally a member of Joy Boy's crew. It just seems unlikely to me that Joy Boy actually succeeded. At the very least, I like the thought that pirates are still doing Davy Back fights because they never got Davy back. So I hope at this point, now that we're 36 minutes into the video, you guys give me the courtesy of being able to reach for the stars. It just seems fitting to me that Joy Boy would not be able to defeat the devil at the devil's own games. However it exactly played out, Joy Boy eventually realized that he would not be able to win. As a side note, I see Imu's abilities working in a very similar way as Gecko Moria. Oda was very overt in telling us in Thriller Bark. Gecko Moria told Luffy and the crew that even if you defeat me, the shadows won't return to your friends. Like, we know ultimately they did, but it seemed to be more of an error on Gecko Moria's part than actually what would happen in any normal circumstances. So keeping in mind that we're making a lot of assumptions now, I think that if Imu was the enemy of Joy Boy during the Void Century, Joy Boy couldn't just defeat Imu in order to get Davy Jones's soul back. So it's easy to imagine that Joy Boy may have been faced with a very difficult choice. Because if you defeat Imu, Davy Jones's soul is potentially lost forever. Davy Jones's locker. But here's another thing to consider. If Davy Jones was transformed into a demon, based on what we know right now from the God's Knights and from Dory and Brogy, etc., right? You're immortal. Or at the very least, you have the ability to live forever, even if there's some hockey means of killing you. So if you defeat and kill Imu, Davy Jones' soul is lost forever. But in order to stop Davy Jones, you must kill him. Otherwise, he will continue to be evil forever. And this potentially dooms the entire world. I guess I haven't outright stated this yet, but it seems likely to me that Davy Jones is actually who a lot of people refer to as the sun god Nika. Usopp, and therefore simultaneously Davy Jones becoming a god, is relevant. In Elbaf, we are introduced to this contradiction, this dichotomy of how people perceive Nika. Is he a laughing god or is he a destroyer? I believe that it is possible that there were two different Nikas that different people believed in. Some believed in Joy Boy, and some believed in Davy Jones. And if the entire world are demons, then the devil rules the world. So what does Joy Boy do? Does he defeat Emu? Clearly not. Does he kill Davy Jones? Maybe, but it would be a very difficult decision to make. Guys, one of the central themes of the story is that Luffy's treasure is really his crew. I mean, he may have other treasures as well, like his straw hat, but in reality, Luffy's crew is what matters most to him. And this is, of course, a story about pirates, and a pirate's hoard and protect their treasure. Something that Luffy obviously believes to be true is that he needs his crew. Every single member, every single one of them, including Usopp, right? They're essential for him to achieve his dreams and to become free. While he has the ability to protect them, while there is a chance that they could live, Luffy would fight for them. One of Luffy's defining characteristics, right? Very vital. He never gives up, no matter the odds. And most of us assume that Joy Boy is the same or very similar. So based on this, it seems intuitive to me that Joy Boy would have sought an option C. They say that Roger acquired everything this world had to offer. That is what the One Piece is, right? The One Piece is everything that you want. Not just most, but more specifically, a lot of characters look at it as Roger's treasure. Obviously unaware because Roger did not inform them that this was a treasure that predated him, right? But at his execution, he exclaimed to the world, if you want to find my treasure, it is in that place. So you could potentially think about the One Piece as Joy Boy's treasure, or potentially, as we've said many times now, whoever came before Joy Boy. So if these characters are like Luffy, what is their treasure? It's their friends. I know that we're not quite being clear yet, guys, but have patience. Based on everything that we've speculated in this video, I find it to be incredibly likely that the straw hat that Emu has kept safe beneath Mary Joie is a hat that actually belonged to Davy Jones, not Joy Boy. Which, if true, is mind-blowingly fitting because Luffy's other treasure aside from his crew, his friends, is his hat. But if the hat actually represents a crew member inherited from the past, then it's all essentially the same thing. It's like a little memento to Davy Jones. He may be gone, but he's still with us. We're protecting the memory of him. And I think that this also works incredibly well with Emu now possessing the hat. It would be like somebody stole Luffy's straw hat, and they understood what that meant. Emu stole this treasure. Perhaps he won it in a game. Another extremely common thing in a Davy Back fight that is under-discussed is stealing other crews' flags. It's akin to stealing a crew's soul. Like, the whole idea of a Davy Back fight is to steal crew members, right? But amongst all of this, it's implied that a flag is a crew member, in exactly the same way as we are speculating about the straw hat. So look, guys, I'm assuming that this Luffy-like figure did not defeat the devil. I'm assuming that this Luffy-like figure did not kill his treasure, his friend. If you assume both of these things, then Davy Jones is probably still alive. But if Davy Jones is still alive, transformed into a demon by Emu, then Emu would still have power over them. And if Emu still had power over them, then you would assume that Emu would still utilize Davy Jones as a version of Nika that a lot of the world still believes in. But as it appears to me, Emu possesses the hat, but not the man. So what is an option C that Joy Boy could have pursued? I believe, similar to Luffy and Usopp's fight in Water 7, Joy Boy fought Demon Davy Jones. I think that he won this fight, but he did not kill Davy Jones. Instead, he did what Shanks did to Loki. He imprisoned him in a place that hopefully Emu would never find him, but somebody someday would. The moment that a guy like Joy Boy could not save Davy Jones was the day he could not fulfill his dreams. So he passed them down to the next generation, and subsequently many generations to follow. Guys, I'm of the opinion that Davy Jones is part of the One Piece treasure. Look, I feel you trying to knee-jerk again, and I'm honestly tempted to just let you. If you just want to skip ahead in the video, please do so. Honestly, I would be lying if I told you that I didn't think that I found the answer. Well, this would be more like one half of the answer, but regardless. I've been wrong before, I'll be wrong again, but I have to express that to you. If you really don't want to know, just skip ahead. Just speaking with my heart though, you can do whatever you want to or laugh at me, whatever. So yeah, press mute now. During the course of this video, we talked a lot about Jonah, but I think that some of you might have pieced together with some of the other things that we said that there's also a lot of similarity between Jonah and the devil. In One Piece, Jonah becomes the devil's champion. Lucifer was a loyal crew member to God until he defied him. It is said that Lucifer did this because, wait for it, he was consumed by pride, as well as his ambition to ascend above the heights of the clouds. Guys, the story of One Piece is about doing the impossible, and somehow this will lead to the world being saved. It's about here that I start to think about what is the most impossible task that anyone could ever accomplish. So is this saving the world? Is this saving humanity? Well, sort of. Is it, or will it fulfill every dream for every character that we have met throughout the entirety of One Piece? I think so. But there's a specific way of thinking about it that makes everything click. Now that we basically know that this is a story of humanity and God versus the devil, you might say that this is a story about defeating the devil. I do believe that defeating the devil would save the world. The devil assembles his crew by tempting humanity into evil, and this is why we cannot all achieve our dreams. But at least for the story of One Piece, I do not believe this to be the entire answer. Because what matters most is how you defeat the devil. Because you need to keep in mind that you cannot defeat the devil at his own games. And I think that God, similar to Luffy, cannot defeat the devil on his own. He needs us. This isn't just an impossible dream because it's so difficult. It's impossible because nobody wants it. This story isn't really about defeating the devil. I think it's about saving him because he's God's long-lost treasure. He's the Usopp who left the crew and never came back. In this final conflict of Ragnarok or Armageddon, the devil and God both have their champions. Winning the game is not about who is physically stronger. It's about their views on humanity. In order to defeat the devil once and for all and finally win the game, God has to convince the devil that he was wrong. The plan is not just to save the worthy. It's to save everyone. God might win in a fight, but doing so would cost his soul. It is said that man was made in God's image. Therefore, we are not the only ones who dream. God has a dream too, and all of us are his treasure. Exactly the same as Luffy has consistently done throughout the story. To defeat the devil, he needs to make the devil's champion his friend. And rather than kill him or conquer him, convince him to give up. Convince him to believe that the One Piece is real for him as well. But in order to accomplish this, you have to attack the devil's main tool, fear. And I think what we all fear most in different forms is loss. So in a way, I think that this story is about conquering death, and it's symbolic that Emu is immortal. But if you take what Dr. Heroic said literally, he said that a man dies when he is forgotten. So the One Piece is the promise that God does exist. So you and everybody else will never die, because he will always remember. I feel like we could have an actual debate as to whether this will literally be true or simply be subtext. I also think that we could have a second debate as to whether this will apply to the entire world or simply the devil's champion. Either way, at the end of the story, just like the Harley text suggests, they will meet again. In probably many ways simultaneously, the broken pieces will become one. Central to all of this, I believe, is Davy Jones. Humankind was made in the image of God. So some simple logic is what the devil thinks of man is what the devil thinks of God. God is supposed to be this being of love, but he loves humankind most. Therefore, the devil thinks God is a liar and is jealous of man. So I want you to spare a thought for characters like Blackbeard or Loki, whose flashback we are getting right now. Loki is convinced that he is not loved, that he can't be, and certainly not after his betrayal. These characters represent the devil, and the ideological combat is happening through them. But clearly a lot has been said here that may or may not be true. It's a little bit convoluted, it's a little bit hard to digest, and Oda needs to wrap all of this into a package that can be sold. So we need to spell out what the One Piece actually is. Guys, I really do think that the best way to think about the One Piece is that it is literally everything. It is what everyone wants. It is all of those things simultaneously. But this is also a bit hard to digest. So really, when it comes to the story that we're actually reading, only one interpretation of the One Piece actually matters, and that is Luffy's interpretation. What Luffy wants the One Piece to be. So I do think that it's the dream that Luffy tells people about, that they hear and they're either shocked or amused. That is actually what the One Piece is for the story. So I believe that when we discover what this dream is, we have discovered what the One Piece is. And I also think that this has to be a dream that has been passed down for thousands of years. So this is what I think. I think that Luffy's dream is to make the devil laugh. It's really only something that a child could conceive of. You could even imagine a young Luffy surrounded by Ace and Sabo who are so strong and cool. He wanted to outdo them all by dreaming for something that nobody else could possibly imagine, let alone actually do. But this is actually a dream that has been inherited, and there's other characters in the story previously who've had it, such as Joy Boy. And in my headcanon, this is why Joy Boy could not fight the devil. Because his childhood dream, whether stupid and impossible or not, is his dream. In my opinion, this is why Roger laughed and why Roger named Laugh-Tale. Not only is the story amusing and ironic in different ways, but it's also literally a story about a destined laugh. That is really quite unlikely. Anyway, guys, the show must go on. This is what I'd previously recorded. But either way, if all of this is true, I think that you should believe that it is incredibly likely that Davy Jones will be set free, whether by Blackbeard or by Luffy. So just some more brilliant writing on Oda's part. What does Luffy believe in? Man, Luffy believes in freedom. Whether it be Davy Jones or Loki, the fact that they are shackled, that won't sit right with him. Even if releasing this person might destroy the world, Luffy would never choose to believe in that possibility. If this person really is the threat that everyone says that they are, then he'll just find a way to defeat them. And if there's something else that the poneglyphs or otherwise tell him to do, Luffy will believe that there is some way. Even if he didn't know it, Roger didn't know it, and Joy Boy didn't know it. Just an important thing about Luffy, he does not live in fear. Luffy will always choose to travel into the belly of the beast. And I like this quote because that is where I think that Davy Jones is. Where is Laugh-Tale? Where is the One Piece? Well, I think the story of Jonah tells us. There was a period in time where Jonah was stuck in a kind of purgatory, Davy Jones' locker. While here, he had some chance for salvation. It offered him the opportunity to contemplate the decisions that he had made and what was ultimately right or wrong. But yeah, Jonah ended up in the belly of the whale. From the moment that we arrived in the Grand Line, we discovered a person crocus living literally inside of the whale lagoon. Whales are something that are obviously important to the story. Beyond the mysterious whale tree in Zoe, we're told by the Sea Kings that the whales are rejoicing at the idea that the sovereign may be born. Similar to the namesake of Whitebeard's ship, I truly believe that Moby Dick actually exists in One Piece, the Whale King. And if you read Moby Dick, I think that you can compare Captain Ahab to Blackbeard or Marshall D. Teach. And I'm sure that most people are aware of this, but Teach was the actual real-life historical name for the pirate Whitebeard. The whale Moby Dick was like this eternal enemy of Captain Ahab. He wanted revenge for something that the whale had done to him, and he spent his life trying to find it, although that task proved to be very, very difficult. The whale was quite elusive. It's also interesting that important in the story was the whale's quote-unquote whiteness, which you could perhaps compare to Nika. A character in the story muses that the whiteness strikes more of a panic to the soul than even darkness. The whale, in a sense, represents existential void. Like basically, it's a philosophical question. An existential void refers to the absence of inherent meaning or purpose in the universe. It's like this unsettling realization that life, reality, or the cosmos may lack clear answers or ultimate truths, leaving humans to grapple with uncertainty, insignificance, or the limits of knowledge. Moby Dick perhaps embodies this void by being an ungraspable entity that defies humans' attempts to define or conquer it. So long story short is Captain Ahab pursues the void, and the same can be said of Blackbeard. At the same time, this void, or this whale, also is a great representation of the One Piece, an ungraspable, unattainable entity that defies humans' attempts to conquer or define it. What is the One Piece? Well, it's whatever you want to believe that it is. That is what it is. This also works really well with the idea of into the belly of the whale. This idiom actually derives from the story of Jonah. And this was obviously a great inspiration to the story of Moby Dick and Captain Ahab, who chased Moby Dick for 3 nights and 3 days, the same as Jonah spent within the whale. But similar to Davy Jones' locker, as Jonah exists within the belly of the whale, he is existing within a void. Darkness and isolation, existential confrontation, the limitations of a human's ability to know the truth, and whether to believe in a higher power. Because truly what traveling into the belly of the whale means is facing a challenge which could change you, enable you to grow, or destroy you. So I think that Moby Dick in the story of One Piece is real, and it is a 1,000-year-old whale, which Blackbeard and perhaps Emu as well seek to kill. Either way, I personally like the thought that Joy Boy, or whoever came before Joy Boy, actually met this whale when they were a baby, similar to Laboon. And the story will end up being at least somewhat similar to the Rumbar Pirates. A promise of some kind was made that will one day hopefully be fulfilled. And until then, Moby Dick waits. But I do find myself liking the idea that part of the way to find Moby Dick, this massive island whale, right? The actual location of Laugh Tale involves music. It's just very important that Laboon loves Binks' sake. And every time they play it, he smiles and laughs, and his mouth opens. How fitting would it be that in order to find the island, in order to find the treasure, at least one step requires you to bring an ancient whale, Joy. Although I wonder if Blackbeard might have plans for the Gura Gura no Mi. But yeah, guys, even if everything that I said here is not true, I feel like the very least that you have to recognize is that this would be a story worthy of One Piece. So I'm sure that you guys already know, but there's a ton more that I could find a way of trying to say. But eventually it gets to be a bit too much. So I just want to conclude this with some lingering thoughts to tie off a few bows, and then give you guys my updated mega theory for everything that happened in the past, roughly. But we're not going to justify it, I'm just going to tell it like a story. But yeah, I would say that I spent a good bit of this video waffling as to the identity of Davy Jones, or the era that Davy Jones was from. Is Davy Jones from the Void Century, or perhaps sometime even before then? I think at this point, fans who follow theories know that history is repeating itself, that events are cyclical, and that there's parallels in the current era with the eras that came before. And we also know, because of the Harley texts in Elbaf, that there were 3 important eras or worlds. So there's so much more to uncover about the first world. So I guess that it would just be the most simple to say this. Characters in the current story, Luffy, Blackbeard, Emu, etc., all have parallels. There's characters who parallel them from the prior eras. Or in Emu's case, it could literally be the same dude for the last 3,000 years, but ignoring that. But while their stories are very similar and they're meant to reflect each other and they're similar type people making similar type decisions, the stories are not exactly the same. If you thought about this like Pirates of the Caribbean, I think that you would be thinking about it in the right way. It starts off as Davy Jones as the good guy and Calypso as the bad guy. And then Davy Jones becomes the bad guy. And then the good guy ends up being Captain Jack Sparrow. But then it becomes a little bit complicated because Captain Jack Sparrow is a pirate by nature. He is the bad guy, also involving immortal treasure and such, right? So then technically the Navy, those that represent justice and order, are the good guys, but eventually they acquire Davy Jones' power and they become the devil, so they become the bad guy. So then the Pirate Alliance summons the devil from the first world, i.e. Calypso, in order to defeat the Navy, and now they're the bad guy again. Basically, the details in all of these stories are different, but all of the stories are the same on repeat. So in my opinion, there is a Luffy Usopp, a Davy Jones Joy Boy, hypothetically, dynamic in each of the worlds. And within all of this is a fight of good versus evil, or God versus the devil. So just keep this in mind. It's possible that even if this theory is like more right than it is wrong, it could also be very wrong in important ways. So for now, I'm just going to believe that Joy Boy and Davy Jones were a part of the same crew, and Davy Jones was born into the second world. Doesn't have to be the case. But I do have an interpretation which could make some sense of it. Because I think that a question that you should ask, right, is like if this dynamic exists in all of the worlds, and by the conclusion of the story, Luffy will free Davy Jones and that will fulfill Joy Boy's dream, then what about the Luffy or the Nika from the first world, you know? Who was their Nakama? Who was their friend? Who was their brother? And how will that story be resolved? So I suppose my opinion comes down to my interpretation of the Harley texts, which the Harley texts are notorious for being interpreted in different ways. So let's tell it like a story. And if you guys are curious why I think these things, then keep listening to me in the future or find whatever video I mentioned this in the past. I'll include links in the description if anything comes to mind. The first line of the Harley text, the first world, is within the earth there was fire. Mankind succumbed to greed and touched the forbidden sun. So I think that the first world, the beginning of all of this, is the creation of the Eternal Flame. The Eternal Flame was this magical power source which provided energy to the entire world. But there was an unintended consequence to this. The Eternal Flame threatened to shroud the entire world in an eternal darkness. It also disturbed the natural order of the world, the proper cycle of life and death. With the advent of endless energy, man achieved immortality. But it didn't take the form that they had anticipated. Also during this time was when devil fruit first appeared in the world. The Harley texts say that the enslaved prayed and the sun god appeared. I think that this works in a very similar way as devil fruits. As Vegapunk tells us, devil fruits are the incarnations of desires. Essentially, they are created because people want them to exist. Nika could very well be the first devil fruit, a savior to bring a doomed world salvation. So my theory has been that the world that we are currently adventuring and living on is actually built atop the world that came before. The entire world is built atop Sky Cloud. So my friend Yahweh Theories calls the world below the Red Sea. I really like this name, so I will use it. The first world is now metaphorically and also literally hell. But as we know, even with parallels, Oda likes to switch it up. He likes to invert things. He likes to foil things. So you gotta be careful of these kinds of assumptions. As an example, something that we've sort of held to be true is that in every example, the guy who represents Jonah or the guy who represents Davy Jones loses his soul and then becomes a demon. But I think that it would be powerful if the inverse of this happened in the first world. The guy who lost his soul was the guy who we would parallel with Luffy. This happened because the natural cycle of life and death was broken. Eventually, the first world was shrouded in darkness and death. The only people who survived from the first world lived atop the clouds. So the Luffy of the first world fought and died within the Red Sea, and his soul, as well as the souls of everybody who died in that world, are now the fuel which creates devil fruits in the world above. Basically, his soul is either trapped in one of the world's great trees or within a devil fruit. He exists within this kind of purgatory. His soul can neither go to heaven nor hell. So the story of the Davy Jones in that era is different, but also equally heartbreaking. He's the version of Usopp that betrayed Luffy and left the crew. He wanted to come back, but never could, because the crew died without him. You know, it could be something cool like this version of Usopp was literally too afraid and ran away. Either way, the end result of all of this is they will never meet again. But as we know, the inherited will is real in One Piece. So long as you are remembered, you can't truly die. So firstly, the people who survived in the world above remembered the hero that saved them and died in the world below. Nika was not forgotten. And I also think that these people were somehow aware of the terrible fate of all the souls that died in the first world. This could go a number of different ways creatively, so I just want to throw an idea at you, but I like the thought that the Usopp of the first world, his dream was to reunite with his crew and with Luffy. This dream was passed down and eventually became a dream to destroy the world. The only way to reunite with those who lost their lives is for the second world to fall back into hell. I believe this to be what Imu is still attempting to do. Reach the first world. And this opens up the interesting possibility that Imu may be the Davy Jones of the first world. He is your Usopp-like character who somehow obtained immortality. While we all assume that his motives are sinister, that there can be no good reason for destroying the world, in this case, there might be. It's possible that they wish to rectify their past mistakes or failures and reunite with their friends. It's also possible, if they know enough about devil fruits and if devil fruits work this way, that Their goal is to destroy the means to produce devil fruits, i.e., they need to destroy the eternal flame, which still exists in the Red Sea below. But once again, all of this would be metaphorical. If Imu is the Davy Jones, the first Davy Jones, they lost their soul not by literally losing their soul, but by losing their dreams. And Imu's new dream to destroy the eternal flame is akin to the desire to destroy God. Usopp has always been the most human of anyone in the story, and like all of us regular folk, he grapples with accepting death. The same as Usopp's conflict with Luffy about the Mary. He doesn't understand why he can't have what he wants, why God would take his treasure. So in anger and fear, the dream became to kill God while capturing immortality. But literally coring into the center of the planet, which would be reminiscent of hell, is not so simple a task. Thus, you have a reason for somebody to desire the use of the ancient weapons. But I think that you should realize that most of the people actually living in the world would be totally unaware of this story or be influenced by these desires. So I think that the second world was marked by several calamities, all caused by Imu or the devil. The world prayed for salvation, and once more, Nika appeared, this time in the form of Joy Boy. He started off knowing nothing, but eventually learned everything. Personally, I like the thought that he saved the world or the planet by erecting the Red Line. If you think about the Red Sea as the literal sea, then the world above and all the people that live there are already in a metaphorical Noah's Ark. The entire world is the Ark. The devil was attempting to make the world fall into hell, and I'm presuming that they had some success. And so the Red Line acts as the keel to the ship. It's actually holding the world together. But I think that you should think of this keel in the very same way as it is presented to us in Water 7 with the Going Merry. Once you damage the keel, the ship is doomed. So it'd be a pretty incredible plot twist if it's actually Imu who desires the destruction of the Red Line. There's a lot of really good characters in the present story that want the destruction of the Red Line. You can think about Laboon, you can think about the Giants. An important theme in the story of One Piece is bringing people together, right? And the Red Line divides us, therefore it must be destroyed. But it's possible that doing so would be even more calamitous than you could possibly imagine. But I suppose that this is also kind of the concept of traveling into the belly of the whale. Maybe it needs to happen anyway. Luffy won't just fulfill the dreams of the third world or the second world. He will fulfill the dreams of the first world as well, of everybody. And possibly that even includes Imu. So Luffy will succeed in saving Davy Jones's soul. But he also needs to save the soul that has gone missing from the first world, so that the they from every world will finally meet again. My speculation is that this is trapped in the cycle of devil fruit, so Luffy will destroy the devil fruit. And the way that I speculate that he would accomplish this is by destroying the Red Sea and the eternal flame which still exists within it. Metaphorically, once again, the eternal flame is the forbidden fruit from the tree of knowledge. There are simply some things that we were never meant to and should never have known. And it took this story to discover why. Either way, guys, whether you agree with parts of this, none of this, or all of this, I really hope that you found it to be interesting. As per usual, I find myself gravitating away from like specific One Piece predictions. You know, like as an example, a lot of people already think that Usopp will die in the story. And in order to free Davy Jones at the end of Pirates of the Caribbean, they had to kill him. And like you could go down that rabbit hole as well. Like there's a million different directions to go. And eventually I just have to sort of decide. And at the end of the day, I like some of this like philosophy angle that we tackled at the end because I enjoy that. I also feel like that's something that I can do, or at least I attempt to do, where other people don't, and that's that's the value of my channel, I guess. But yeah, I suppose my goal with making any theory is to explain it well enough that you guys really understand it. You understand it, and you can apply it in whatever way that you see that makes sense to you or excites you. So go be free, my people. But yeah, as always, I'm curious as to what you guys think. Leave your thoughts in the comment section below. If you're interested, check out my book, The Booms. Link is in the description. Like the video, subscribe, click the bell to be notified, join the squad. And as always, guys, have a wonderful day.